Welcome. My name is Sandra Ziehm, and we're doing a series of shows on real estate. And the name of our show is Real Estate with Harmony, because I am the owner-broker of Harmony Real Estate. Today we're doing a show on house inspections, and we have my very special guest with us today, Joe Griffin, who owns and works for Tri-State Home Inspections. Well-established professional in his industry, and he has slides that he shows to real estate companies and educates us all as to the red flags of that you want to look for when you're buying a home. I've had a personal experience with Joe where he had one of his agents come out and did the house inspection, and when we closed on the house inspection, the insurance company wouldn't insure because they were not happy with the wiring. And of course, my buyers were devastated. They were an elderly couple, frail to some extent anyway, and when they couldn't move into their home, it was traumatic, to say the least. And refreshingly enough, I called Joe, and Joe, you were there within an hour. I want to say you were there pronto, and I was so relieved. Had you not been there, it would have fallen on me, because I feel responsible. I mean, these people were depending on me to help them. And so, Joe came out, and not only did he come out and say, yes, you're right, this is a problem, but he took care of the problem. He paid for it, had it done instantly almost, so that these folks could move into their home, and so that what could have been a nightmare became a refreshing accountability that I will always be grateful for. It's interesting because, and I'm giving all this lead up because I think it's part of the house inspection business to me. The thing is that the liability of recommending somebody for a realtor is great. If I said to a client, I recommend Joe Griffin, go and get him, he'll take good care of you, and then you blow it, they could sue not only you, but me as well. So we are told not to do that. We are told to say, these are inspectors that I've had good experiences with, and based on those experiences, I would hope you would have too. But please feel free to choose from several. And so usually when I tell my story about your accountability, I have to say people are impressed, because I think this is a time in our nation when people are not taking accountability for their mistakes. And we all make mistakes. I mean, life is not all mountaintops. Sometimes you get in the valley.
That's correct.
So so having said that, Joe, that's my introduction to you, because I do have great confidence in your abilities, and I tend to, once I've had a good experience with somebody, I don't forget it.
Right.
Because,
I appreciate that.
Well, we don't always have those kind of experiences. I wish we did, but we don't. And I know, I want to tell you, over my life, I've been selling real estate 45 years. During that time, I've had people who came back to me and said, Sandra, you told me there was a refrigerator in that house, and now I get in there and the refrigerator's gone. And guess what? I had to buy a refrigerator.
Yeah.
And many a refrigerator I've replaced.
Yeah.
So, but you do those things because you want to continue that trust relationship that you have with these customers. And so, having said that, Joe has a show, a slides that he usually gives to us as realtors to tell us what to look for, because sometimes we can pick up on things too. And especially when you list the house, you don't always do the house inspection until after. And truthfully, I think that's something that should be changed. If we did it in front, we could resolve the issues before you get to the choke at the end. Right. And avoid a lot of problems. But it is not the way that the industry does it. And so, having said that, Joe has 10 golden rules
my
for
10,
people
my
who
10
are
golden
buying
rules,
houses?
correct. Yeah. Inspector Joe's 10 golden rules is what I call them, yes. And I developed these purely out of a need for people seeking information from us, mainly younger buyers, first-time home buyers, but they apply to pretty much the general buying market. These are pretty good tips to kind of adhere to. So we'll roll through these from 1 to 10, and
yes.
If you have any questions, or if you want to interject anything, feel free. Basically, my number one rule is, and this ties in with real estate, you'll hear location, location, location. But for me, it's not so much location as to how valuable the property is, or basically appraised value. I'm more worried about the actual location as far as where the home is sited. Is it up high or is it down low? And the
Is
lower
it wet or is it dry?
right, wet or dry, exactly. That is probably the one biggest complaint that homeowners will have is a wet home,
I
wet
tell you
basement, you know.
terrible mistake I made when I had been in real estate like 2 years, and I had a personal friend who was buying a private for sale, so I wasn't selling it to her. And she said, Sandra, please come over and look at it and give me your opinion. Well, I went over and it was beautiful. I mean, I walked, it was gorgeous. It was a showplace, designer decorated, if you will. And so I got to the door and she said, do you think you ought to look at the basement? I said, oh, no, it looks beautiful. I can't imagine they'd let that basement. And I left. Well, guess what? When she went to sell it, I had to sell it, and there was a boat down in that basement. And I have to say, even now, it's been 25 years, I still say to myself, Sandra, that was irresponsible on your part. You should have gone down there. You should have done it. You should have, you should have, should have. So you do learn by your mistakes, and we all make mistakes, but the water can be a real serious
So location to me applies more to where if your home is at the bottom of a bowl, or you're receiving all the runoff from your neighbors, if your home happens to be at the lowest point of the street, and all the runoff not only from the land but from their homes and roofs ends up in your basement, then you're not going to be too happy. So that's one of the things. You can't always choose the exact site, but you're better off to be on a much higher location than everybody else, if possible. So try to choose wisely and look at how the grading is actually affecting your home. The grade should taper away from the home and not basically invert into the home where the water is directed into the foundation, because that can make for mold, wet basements, a lot of things, just basic destruction.
And some water problems you can resolve, but other water problems are not resolvable, is what I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I would say 50% of them are resolvable, but there's a hard 50% that are not. The basements are just going to be chronically wet, and you try to avoid that if you're buying, especially your first home and you have no experience. It's a lot to take on. So, otherwise you're going to be bailing water, and you don't want to do that. Every time we get a significant rainstorm and have to worry about you're potentially ruining your finished basement. So, very important. Location is number one.
Does it creep upstairs? I mean, for instance, if
It permeates the whole house, basically, because the moisture gets into everything. It gets into the drywall, possibly. It can create fungus. It gets into the carpet. That can breed fungus. And if you have, let's say, a forced hot air system, then that heating system is going to pick up that fungus and distribute it to the rest of the house. So water down low means water pretty much everywhere in the house. So it makes for an unhealthy environment.
Several years ago, I think there was a house in Merrimack where the people actually had to move out because the fungus had permeated it so bad. I think one of their children got sick, and I think the house was condemned, I want to say. That might have been 10 years ago.
Worst case scenario, that can happen. I mean, you
Yes.
hear the horror stories on television about that, and most of the times that's not the case. Most of the time, the mold can be remediated out if it hasn't gotten to the point of no return. But for the most part, there are many companies out there that do a really good job of remediating and ensuring that it doesn't come back. One of the most important things is to, and we're getting off topic a little bit, but one of the most important things is to really control the water around your house and dictate that. And we're going to get into that a little bit more.
That's one of the golden rules.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll go to number 2, and basically this is just when you're going out with a real estate agent such as yourself. I always advise buyers to look twice. Basically, always walk around the home a couple of times. Try to go around in opposite directions and really sort of get a good feel for the house. A lot of people drive up to a home, they go into the front door, and they get kind of bowled over by the interior, and they kind of forget about what's going on. And maybe if they had walked around outside and saw some rotted siding or some pieces of roofing on the ground or maybe a crack in the foundation, they might have raised an eyebrow. They might have at least questioned you on it and said, well, maybe we should look someplace else. We're not really too happy. So you just got to kind of stay focused when you're going out looking at homes.
And that's where it's critical as to what agency your agent is. Is that agent representing you, or are they representing the seller? And if they're representing the seller, are they going to point out the hazards of the possible red flags, if you will, of the house? So and we're going to, following this session, we're going to do a session on buyer agency, but it becomes a critical part of it, actually.
There's a potential for minimizing those sorts of things in the agent relationship with the buyer. So that's good that you're going to touch on that, because people need to think about protecting themselves, and those buyer agency relationships get very, very important. So I always recommend, like I said, always look twice, walk around the house a couple of times, try to do it different times of the day or night if you possibly can, to maybe gauge traffic noise at the same time. The airplane's going over the house. There's a lot of things. Is there a train going by that you want to try to hit that house at a couple of different times during the day, maybe to see what the traffic is like in the morning or the afternoon. All these things are going to factor in. So it's good to try to visit the house so there aren't any surprises. But the big thing for me is to just look around the house. Bring a couple of people with you, maybe bring mom and dad if you've never owned a home. And they're experienced, and they can actually add a lot, and they can say, hey, boy, this roof looks like it's seen better days, or, is that, is
But
is
that
basically that
puts
thing.
me in mind that sometimes people bring, they want to replace the home inspector with a family member. And first off, the accountability we were talking about is not there for a family member. If they, like when I overlooked that wet basement, there was no accountability other than, of course, in my soul, I was concerned, and even to this day it bothers me when I see her. I apologized over and over. It was a dumb thing. Right. But the accountability is not there for a family member. That right. would be if you're dealing with an agency who, and you have insurance to
right.
some extent, right?
Every home inspection company that operates has to be licensed in New Hampshire, and they actually have to have show proof of liability to the licensing board. So yes, in addition, some home inspection companies will carry insurance above and beyond that, but that's an individual basis only. But they have to have a minimum of liability insurance with the state. So and that's basically monitored by the licensing board. So yeah.
I actually have found New Hampshire to be pretty good. We bought some property in Florida, and the house inspection company there was totally unaccountable. I mean, after we closed on the house, we found out there was like $12,000 worth of damage to the pool alone that had never been mentioned. And I couldn't envision that happening in New Hampshire. So New Hampshire, we have some good companies, and I always say go to somebody that you have a friend who they've used them. So you're getting a reference. You're getting somebody who's had a positive experience, so that you're not getting a pig in a poke. Is that, right, yeah. Is that what I want to say? Because
perfume on a pig, or yeah, yes. That's one we like to use too.
Don't want to do it.
Yeah, and that's good that you talk about how you find home inspectors, because I think that probably 60% of my business is either repeat clients. They bought homes maybe 5-10 years ago. They're moving up or out, or lateral move, or up or down, or whatever the market is dictating, or they're bringing their family members in, maybe their sons and daughters.
Best reference you can get.
Right, so that's very important.
And real estate, they come to you trusting you because they've got that frame. Mm-hmm. But if they come to you and they don't know you, you have to prove yourself to them, and it's a totally different. And I don't blame them. It's a natural thing, and it's a good thing. It's a protective. You have to protect your interests. Each of us has to do that. But when they come with a personal reference, it's a whole different, much nicer, yeah. much nicer.
The last thing that either you or I or the buyer or the seller wants is basically buyer regret. After the home has been sold and it's closed upon, the last thing we want is buyer regret, because that hurts everybody.
Not healthy.
And so that's why, truth and professionalism, honesty, those are the things that we need. Integrity, those things all have to remain in place. So that nothing really comes between the buyer and that purchase that they've invested, emotionally and financially.
The biggest investment that most people make in their lives.
Exactly.
It amazes me sometimes how casually people go into such a big investment. So right. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
And one last tip on my always look twice is it doesn't hurt to look at a home when it's raining out. In fact, as a home inspector, I would prefer to do a home inspection when it's pouring out. It allows me to see.
Is the snow the same way now?
No, snow is very, very restricting. In fact, we have to basically disclaim a lot. Like today, this morning, we did an inspection. Roof is covered in snow because of the recent snowfall. So we have to disclaim that. We have to rely heavily on the disclosure, which I'm sure you'll get into more in future segments, as far as the disclosure between the seller and the buyer as to what they know about the home. And if they know the age of the roof, or if they have paperwork on the roof, then that's going to help. But on a day like today, where we're just past the snowfall, it's really hard. So we have to say we know nothing about the roof. What we'll do is we'll go in the attic and we'll try to tell you as much as we can to see if it's leaking or if there's been problems in the past with it. But yeah, snow is very difficult, but we have to work with it. We can't stop selling and buying homes here
Not
in the
New England.
Yeah. So, but rain to me is a real benefit because it allows me to see how the water is being handled by the home, how it comes off the roof. Are there gutters? Are there not gutters? And if there isn't any gutters, where's that water going? And more than likely, it's going into the basement. Okay, so that's why I like to see. And we also see if the roof is leaking when we're up in the attic. So rain is a friend during a home inspection. It doesn't hurt to look at a home when it's raining out either. If you're going around looking at houses, don't not call your real estate agent just because it's raining out. Actually, it's a good time to look at houses. It may not be, friendly for you, but just bring an umbrella because it's good to see the house.
Well, that's one of the golden ones I agree with.
Okay.
That's a good
And
one.
we're gonna roll to number 3 then, and we'll see if you agree with 3. And this one here I call age before beauty, and it's basically that you've got to be careful when you're buying homes as a buyer, and this is really important, especially with first-time home buyers that don't understand the lifespan and life expectancy of building materials and roofing and septic systems and furnaces and boilers. Just about all of those things I mentioned have about a 20-year lifespan. So you have to be really careful if you're looking at an 18 to 19 to 20-year-old home. Has the owner put some money back into the home, or are you walking into things that are expiring? And if you are, then you're going to be writing some hefty checks in the first few years of ownership, which is going to make for some buyer regret.
I will tell you, as a listing agent, when I go in to give advice on preparing a home for marketing, I always tell them to pay close attention to cosmetics because people do invariably what you're saying. Invariably, they fall in love. It's an emotional decision as opposed to a head decision. And so they end up with an 18-year-old heating system. So 2 years into the house, you've got a $10,000 expense. And most people take their last few coins to get into the house.
The bank takes it.
Yes, so it's usually more than 2 years before you have extra money to be buying other things. So I absolutely agree with you, buy with your head and not with your heart. But we women, I hate to say it, but we women tend to do that. That's myself included.
Kitchens and bathrooms are #1 on people's list, but I tell them those things are fairly simple to fix. You don't want to have to write a check for a new roof or a new boiler or a new septic system within a year or 2 of ownership. It's going to make for some buyer regret, which again, we don't want.
And this foreclosure market, you must see a lot of that.
Right.
Some of these foreclosures.
Well, at least foreclosure, you're going into that
buying
with,
it low.
yeah, you're probably going to get compensated for that probably on the bottom line as far as the price is concerned. So you're probably going to know that going in. You're going to be educated that you're going into a foreclosure. There wasn't a lot of money from the previous owner, so more than likely you're going to run into some hurdles. And hopefully the price of the home will reflect that. So foreclosures, we kind of assume that the buyer knows what they're getting into. But if it's just a transfer of property and there's an owner of record and they know what's going on in the home, they can try to be as honest as possible. But that's where the home inspection comes in, because we can determine that.
Usually the foreclosures have a legal term in them as purchased as is, which basically is exactly what you're saying. It is saying to the legal world, these people have no comeback. They are buying it as is. So if the heating system is bad, if the roof is bad, whatever is bad, once they've closed, they own all of those heartaches.
Right.
So and it's as long as they know that and the price reflects it, it's all right. It's when.
Yeah, it's where foreclosures and short sales are a little bit different segment of the market. So the buyers hopefully are educated enough to know that they could be walking into a hornet's nest in some of those areas, and they have to be prepared for that. So
I used to say no surprises. People, as long as they're not surprised, people usually will go with the flow. But when they feel that something was withheld, and I understand and appreciate that, so I tell my agents all the time, disclose, disclose, disclose. And no surprises.
Honesty is the best policy.
Yeah.
So let's check out number 4 here, and we'll see if we're still in agreement here. I call this one "Remove Rose-Colored Glasses," and this really applies to generally a lot of first-time home buyers, because a lot of younger buyers come into the whole purchase and sale agreement and the whole purchase process of a home. And they're just not educated enough. It's not that they're ignorant. They just haven't owned enough property to know what to look for. So a lot of these younger buyers come into a home and they look at the space for the pool table, perhaps, or the garage, where are the tools going to go, and the bedroom, is the bedroom set going to fit? And all of those things are not really, really important. They need to really start looking at other things as they're walking through the homes and try to focus on the things that are going to be important to them.
One of the big things they do is they go out and buy the king-size bed, and then they buy the 24 by 38 ranch, whose biggest bedroom was 12 by 11.
Right.
And of course the bed takes up the whole room.
Yeah.
And I can't even tell you over the years how many times I've heard that. Yeah. Over and over, people will say, "Oh, my bed will never fit in there." So sometimes when you're young, you do have rose-colored glasses, and
right.
I hate to see them go completely, but
yeah, but I mean, it's just look for sort of common sense things as they're walking around the home, rather than looking at where things possibly might fit, or if there's room for this or room for that. It should be looking at the roof or at the siding, at the windows, and sort of just getting some sort of common sense ideas as to really what condition this house is in and whether or not, you know, it's going to work for them and how much money they're going to maybe have to spend on it. So they need to kind of look a little bit further than the obvious things. You know, and even on a home inspection, it happens. People start taking out tape measures and they're starting to measure rooms while I'm trying to educate them about the home, and I have to politely remind them that they need to kind of stay focused. We're here to learn about the integrity, safety components, you know, the life expectancies. There's a lot of things we need to cover on a home inspection. There's time for measuring later on. Okay, so that's just kind of
it's again the heart overtaking the head.
Yeah. So sometimes we have to refocus the buyers. So
yes.
Yeah. But that's
why a good buyer agent.
Yeah.
Comes
Exactly.
in handy.
Yeah. And we're probably going to get to one of those rules here pretty soon.
You have an agent rule?
It's coming up. It's definitely in there. Rule number 5 is do your homework. And what I mean by that is that a lot of these homes that people are buying are not brand new. They could be, you know, 100 years old. But for the average buyer, your home is going to probably be at least 20 years old and maybe more. And in 20 years, a lot can happen to a home. Additions, wiring, plumbing, repairs, you know, there's a lot of things that can happen. So one of the smart things for people to do is once they have made an offer on a home, they know the address, they go right down to the town hall and they can pull a lot of records and basically pull the history. It's almost like a Carfax for your home, and basically it's going to give you the history.
Sometimes they can even do it online.
Could do it online
Nashville
in some cases,
certainly
yeah.
online. I know most Hudson is online.
Correct.
So you can go right online today. The realtor has so many technical pluses that we didn't have in my 45 years.
Oh my God, the internet has revolutionized. The digital cameras, everything has revolutionized this business, even from my aspect, yeah. But the whole homework part of this is basically permits pulled. See if there's any open permits. If you see that there's been a recent addition to this house,
you can see about violations even, can't you?
Right, you can, and you can see if were there permits pulled to have this gigantic addition, and you know, basically.
So they just go to the city hall of the town where the property is located,
right. and just ask for anything as far as records are concerned.
Sometimes your buyer agent will do that for you as well.
Right. Exactly. So, but that's definitely important is to check for outstanding permits, contractor information, and that can kind of give you an idea of whether or not things were done legally. And that's very important because you could buy a home, and if the deck wasn't, if there was no permit pulled to install a deck, and now the appraiser or the assessor comes in, and now there's no records of this deck ever having been, been constructed. Now you're on the hook for additional taxes that you may not have been aware of. So there's a lot of these things tie into that. So it's good to kind of do the homework. There may not be any records on the home, but in some cases there's at least.
Well, and insurance companies keep records on houses now too. I know that if for instance, I think it's all online as well. Mm-hmm. But I think, for instance, if there's been a fire, since it's been online, it's going to be in those records. And the insurance companies, I understand, they use that to determine the rate, how much they're going to charge you for your insurance.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting where technology has taken us.
Yeah, no, and it's all helpful. More information is definitely educated consumer. So that's do your homework is rule number 5. So here, this might be one of your favorites. Get an agent. Number 6. Yeah.
Harmony Real Estate, guys.
One of the reasons I say this is as a home inspector, invariably I run up into a for sale by owner situation. And I've come across these over the last few years. And what I see happening with the absence of a good real estate agent, somebody that's trained, that knows the neighborhood, that knows the market, that has the buyer's interests at heart, the buyers will generally run into an owner who has really no emotional attachment whatsoever to the buyers. They really could care less. They just want the home sold. And some of them can be devious and they can hide things. It's great when the buyers will get a home inspector and we can uncover some of that, but we're not perfect. There are things that homeowners can do to hide things from home inspectors that we're just not going to be able to tell. So it's always good to have a buyer agent, somebody that's there in your corner, sort of a bulldog for you that's going to protect you. And basically, if there's ever any issues that come up in the whole contract, purchase and sale contract, then they can represent you there rather than trying to do things. A lot of times people don't want that confrontation with an owner, and the real estate agents come in between and can act as a buffer.
Well, part of it is that they know where to go to get the information. A lot of people don't realize that you can go to City Hall and you can check out the violations, if you will, that they've had. Especially multifamily housing usually have a lot of violations because they're tenant occupied in most cases.
Right.
And so those violations they give you an indication of what work you're going to have to do to bring it into code. And if it's not in code, the city can come out and get aggressive about making you bring it into code.
Right.
So it's a lot of it is knowing where to go to get the information and being aggressive about it.
My experience with, and the reason I came up with this as rule number 6 is that I just saw, especially younger couples that had never owned homes before, they were really getting buffaloed by some of these owners. These owners were just really almost overly aggressive, misleading, and in some cases very pushy, and trying to just basically get these buyers on paper before they actually had any.
Exactly what you're saying. I have investment properties that I rent to people, and I tell people who are looking for tenants, if they're too anxious, if they look too good, guess what? They probably are. Look closer. Right. One time, I remember this so well, they came in and to meet and speak with, they were wonderful. I mean, I would have thought that they'd be first in line in heaven. But when I went online, one of them was a felon.
Right.
So people, you cannot judge a book by its cover. And unfortunately, you have to be you have to dig. You have to dig, and you have to make sure that you're educating yourself. So you're absolutely right.
And protect yourself with an agent. And specifically, when I say get an agent, I say get a buyer agent. Because in some cases, and I'm sure you'll talk about this in further segments on the agency relationship between buyers and sellers, but a buyer agent is specifically working for the buyer, and they have their interest at heart, and that's the really important thing.
It makes a lot of difference.
Yeah. So, number 7, this is family matters. Now, this rule really applies, and it doesn't apply in every case, but I generally will tell people to bring family members along when they're looking at houses, when they're going out and just basically doing open houses, or they're basically doing showings and they're looking at prospective houses, to bring along family members. And generally, don't bring along your irritating cousin, but bring along somebody that possibly has owned a couple of homes, maybe mom and dad, maybe your uncle, your aunt, and somebody that maybe...
Or if you have somebody in construction.
Construction and contracting, right, so that they can possibly start to rule these things out. I have done 3, 4, 5 home inspections for the same clients because they just didn't learn the lessons. Wow. They didn't open their eyes, they didn't bring people in, they didn't bring experienced people in on the showings, so they put offers in on homes that they really had no real reason to put offers in on. If they had looked a little bit closer, if they had brought somebody in that was a little bit more experienced. So sometimes family is a good thing to have when you're going through that transaction. That's a good thing
about getting old, you have experience.
That's right, yeah.
I'm not sure it's worth it. Take me back.
There's a trade-off, right, exactly. But, family in some cases, look, if your family is very irritating, as some family members can be, don't bring them along because they're not going to add anything to the process. But somebody that can just kind of stay in the background and maybe observe and maybe not get in your way, but maybe take in some things that you might have missed. It's always good to have another set of eyes.
I always tell my customers, bring your mother and daddy. I'm happy to meet them. Maybe I can sell them a house too. And I do sometimes.
Right, and there's always that ancillary...
Expand the sphere of influence.
That's right, the network grows there, and that's our real estate, and like I said, most of my business is word of mouth a lot of times, but also family members moving on in the buying process too. So, all right, so rule number 8 is have a plan B, because anything can happen, and not that the home inspection itself will derail the actual sale, but there's a lot of things that happen.
But it does on occasion.
It does on occasion, but some cases it's financing, sometimes it's insurance, sometimes it's unforeseen things that happen to family members possibly during the home buying process.
Well, and today there are so many things. One of the complex decisions they have to make is how much do they want to check? Do they want to check the lead paint? Do they want to check the radon? Do they want to check for asbestos? Water, because sometimes the water, especially if it's not public water, the wells and the septic, and each one of those things add to the cost of the inspection. But sometimes they pay for themselves. I tell people, don't be penny wise and pound foolish. If it costs an extra $150 to check for something, but you have a potential $5,000 expense that it might save you. Frequently what happens is, and probably your experience I would think too, what happens is if the well is bad, the seller, it's going to be bad for anybody who buys it, so then the seller will have to fix that well. And so you end up with a good well as opposed to a major expense coming up next year.
Right.
So I think the home inspections pay for themselves in my view. In my view, they're well worth the money, and I always tell people, you can bring your mother and your daddy and your aunt and your uncle, anybody you want, but please bring a professional as well. Right. And if you do know a major contractor who has across-the-board experience, Not somebody who's just the carpenter, though.
Right.
Not somebody who's just the plumber or just the wiring. Because you have to look at all plumbing, wiring, all of it. You have to look at
Literally
everything.
60,000 different things have to be looked at during the course of a home inspection. There's a lot to
Amazing
take
how
in.
much
Right.
has to be. In fact, actually going around with house inspectors, I have learned just how, and still am not as cognizant as I could be. But
And it's changing every day. I mean, the electrical codes, wiring, plumbing, all those codes are changing, so the inspectors have to sort of keep current on all of that to know as they change to adapt to that and alert people to it. So
to be honest with you, on the closing sheet, yours is one of the costs that I don't have any problem with. A lot of them I think could be gotten rid of.
Right.
But I certainly don't think a home inspector, because you've saved, in most cases, you save them more than it ever costs them.
Right.
And I've had too many where the seller had to make accommodations because things came up that weren't apparent when the house was being viewed.
Yeah.
So,
as an example, yesterday I had a home that was basically a flip home, and an investor bought it and basically put granite, stainless, beautiful work inside the home. They didn't really pay attention to what was going on the outside, and as I walked around with the buyer, I noticed that the deck wasn't attached properly.
oh,
and I
wow.
said, this could be a problem when we get inside. And we got inside, it was $8,000 to $10,000 worth of damage in the interior walls.
Wow.
They didn't see it. I had to basically get permission to take some of the insulation apart, and as I did down the basement, there's literally 6 feet of wall under the deck had been totally rotted away. So there's $8,000 to $10,000 repair. The deck had to be taken off, the patio door, the wall had to be dismantled, all that stuff had to be repaired. So there's a $10,000 savings that the buyer, would not have probably known had he not got the home inspection.
And you're a professional and you shouldn't make those mistakes. But as you're saying that, we bought a house and we waived the house inspection. We're buying it as is. We thought we were smart.
Right.
Turns out we weren't quite as smart as we thought we were.
Right.
And I can even tell you how many problems popped up after that house. I mean, not minor problems, major problems. Termites, and termites can be...
Oh, yeah, especially as you get further south. Yeah, we have a little bit of a problem here, but generally around water, ponds, lakes, things like that. The termite population.
Well, and as they eat into the wood, they can actually destroy the infrastructure of the house.
All right, they go laterally. They'll go right around the whole underpinnings of the home. Termites, very aggressive, and they basically, their diet is your home. Whereas a carpenter ant is just boring in to look for water, and they generally bore in and they bore out, and they'll maybe nest in there, but they don't do quite as much damage as the termites. An infestation of termites can be catastrophic for your home. So yeah, that's part of the pest inspection, as part of the home inspection. We'll touch on that a little bit later. So have a plan B. I know we got off topic a little bit there, but have a plan B is that anything can happen. Don't get too emotionally invested in one home, and always try to maybe have two, because you never know what's going to happen, and try to have a second or have a backup plan so you're not left with nothing, because you want to be able to move on, especially if you're under a time crunch. You got to get your kids in and out of schools, systems, things like that.
And sometimes what will happen is one member of it's a couple usually buying a house, and one of them will fall in love and the other one is not quite as sold. And so you end up with this dialogue going on between them. Well, I think we should look somewhere else. And invariably they will say, what do you think, Sandra? And I can tell you, I always tell people, if you can't agree on one, then go to another one. There's going to be one out there somewhere that you can both agree on, and that will fit both of your needs, both of what you consider. Because what you consider important in a home and what the woman considers important in a home is going to be different. But both people should be part of because we all live in the house. So I tell people, there's always another house. There's always another house.
Right.
And time goes by. A month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, not going to make a big difference. But in the long scheme of things, the wrong house can make. I remember over the course of my years, one of my clients said his wife didn't come. They were transferring, and he didn't want to pay for 2 tickets, I guess. I don't know exactly what those terms were. But he bought the house without her. And I remember I said to him at least 5 times, are you sure your wife? Because if that had been me, I would not have been too happy with that. And he, oh, no, she's fine with anything. Well, the end. She wasn't fine. She held that house against him for years.
Right. Yeah. Well, the internet helps a little bit today, because you can take these tours, these guided tours now.
Well, of course, that was back.
Back then. Yeah.
That was back.
You were buying blind at that point. Yeah.
In a different world. It was a very different world.
Yeah. So number 9 is stay out of the shade, and this applies because everybody's concerned with mold today. That's sort of the biggest thing that people are concerned about in homes, as they should be. So if you're buying a home and it's surrounded by trees and it's just a lot of northern exposure and you don't get a lot of that good sun for 8 to 10 hours a day, that is not healthy for the home. If there's trees all around your home, it might be cool in the summertime, but that also translates to dampness and moisture. And almost every home.
There's two kinds of mold, and one is remedial and one is not. And so if you get the one that's not remedial, it's detrimental to your health and your children as well. And
right.
Children, I think, were more vulnerable at least.
Right.
And so one is, you have to have a test to determine which way it is,
right.
right? You can't look at it.
That's a whole nother forte in mold, and you know, we'll touch on mold testing and mold remediation a little bit later. But as far as my number 9 rule, stay out of the shade, it's just, you have to think about our climate. This is not the South. You know, we have a tendency.
I regret that, you know. Y'all come, honey.
But we have to remember that we need sun. Our house needs sun. A lot of people are like, well, it's a little too sunny here, but it's really so much healthier for your home in the Northeast to at least have at least 3/4 of your home. There's always going to be one north-facing side. Obviously, that's not going to get much sun. But if you compound that by having a lot of trees around the home, that really makes it very difficult for the home to basically dry out after a good thorough rainstorm, and you really need to dry that out. So almost every home that I've ever inspected that is ringed with trees or had a lot of overhanging trees, and you can see that there's mildew on the siding generally, there's going to be moss growth on the roof. Those are all bad signs. Those generally will translate to an unhealthy home where the air quality inside is moist and damp most of the time. The basement will probably be more than likely more damp than it normally would be. So you want to try to avoid too much shade here in the Northeast. It's not the healthiest of things, and you really want that sunlight. In fact, when we find mold in attics, it's generally, the reason is the roof is not getting enough sun, because if the roof is in sunlight for a good 8 to 10 hours a day, then it's going to kill any mold growth that may try to
Is that about ventilation too? Doesn't the attic
ventilation, insulation, there's a lot of things that tie into it, but the lack of sun is one of the leading causes of mold in the attic and also in the basement. The house needs to dry out, basically. So that's one of the things that we talk about. Rule number 9 is stay out of the shade. And the rule number 10 is response time, and this kind of ties into you and your purchase and sale agreements that you'll put forth to your buyers. And home inspectors factor into that, in that once the buyer puts their pen to paper and the seller puts their pen to paper on the purchase and sale contract, for all purposes, the clock starts ticking for the buyer. They're going to generally have 7 to 14 days. I think it's actually sort of gone back to 7 to 10 days now for the most part. I don't see that most people are getting 14 days. So you have 7 to 10 days, which is a pretty limited window to possibly get, as you spoke about, home inspection, pest inspection, radon, water, septic, mold, asbestos, whatever you want. You're going lead paint testing. You have 7 to 10 days now from the time the seller and the buyer sign that purchase and sale. The clock is ticking. You need to have all of those things done. So I always impress upon buyers to get on the phone. If you suspect that the seller is going to agree to your asking price, or you guys are going to come to an agreement, if you think that purchase and sale contract is going to get signed, let's say in a day or two, get on the phone and talk to home inspectors. Start trying to find a good home inspector, try to figure out what their schedule is in anticipation of it. You don't want to wait until the contract is signed, pick up the phone a couple of days later and try to find a home inspector, because especially right now, it's a really busy time going into the spring market. You may not get a home inspector out there, or if you do, it might be at the 8th or 9th day on your 10-day contract. And now you have all those inspections done, and guess what? If there's a lot of things found negatively, you're not going to have time to bring in contractors to actually get prices and quotes on how much this is going to cost to repair. So now you're kind of up against it. Now you may be forced to make a decision and buy this home, and you really don't have all the information you need. So really try to set yourself up and give yourself as much time as possible.
And the dates, I tell my clients all the time, if you've put it 10 days, and you're not going to make it in that 10 days, you need to insist on an extension. You need to insist on it, because in a court of law, it needs to be in writing. It's one thing for us as friends to say, a handshake will do it, Joe, I trust you. But when you're talking about $200,000, $300,000 purchase, handshake's not good enough.
Right.
You really need to keep it so that in a court of law, you would look like you were doing what you were supposed to do.
Again, protecting yourself.
Because time can be, and that phrase, sometimes they put the phrase in there, time is of the essence. And what that means is one day over and you're on your own, folks.
Right.
So that time is of the essence. Sometimes the little simple things that seem so innocent, sometimes those legal phrases are, and there again, a good buyer agent needs to make you aware of the phrases that are critical in legal meaning, if you will.
Right. In some cases, this 7 to 10 days isn't 7 to 10 business days either. It actually includes the weekends. And guess what? People are busy on the weekends, and they may not be on the phone trying to line up home inspectors or contractors or whatever they need to do. So the response time is very, very critical for people to be aware of that.
Life is busy.
Right, exactly.
We're all busy, and we all have to force our schedules to meet the responsibilities we have.
Right. So those are my 10 golden rules, and I think we should probably touch on, I'm sure our viewers probably have some questions as to what a home inspection, first of all, how do you find a home inspector, and what do they cost, and what can you expect from the home inspector? So we can quickly touch on those.
Well, I think money is always a big one.
Right, but you know what? You get what you pay for. And
Yes,
when people
indeed.
call my office and immediately their first question is, what does it cost? We tried to back them off of that and say, well, what are you expecting? Do you want experience? How many home inspections would you like your home inspector to have performed? What kind of references and referrals do they have? Cost, you may be talking about $50 to $100 between home inspectors, and if you're going to do it to save $50, it may cost you in the end a lot more than that.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot better
Penny
questions.
wise and pound
It's a lot better
foolish.
questions to ask than what does it cost, because for the most part, they're all in the same ballpark, home inspections, as far as, and most of them are based on square footage, and your analytical tests like your water and radon and septic, those are generally all a fairly flat
I usually tell
fee.
people, just as a general, I usually say you figure on $500 to $600.
That's a great number, $500 or $600.
You know.
In most cases, it's less than that, and if you're buying, obviously, the bigger the home.
Well, the less
more-
they inspect, I mean, if they don't do lead and they don't do all of the other discretionaries, then it's going to be less.
Right.
But if they do and I think the discretionaries, it depends on your experience level. I mean, some people come in and they have a natural inclination to mechanical things. And other people come in and, especially first-time buyers, you're absolutely right. They have not had experience. And so mother and dad took care of it. So now, for the first time in their lives, they're tackling unknowns. And when you're tackling unknown, I don't think you can be too cautious.
Right.
Better to be slow and steady and win the long race.
Exactly.
So
maybe you can explain the process, because you're actually on the other side of the table. I get the phone calls, and sometimes the phone calls are a direct result to our office from real estate agents such as yourself because of the information that you provide to the buyer. So let's just take this let's say from ground zero and say, okay, you've got buyers that have signed a purchase and sale agreement, and now they need a home inspector. So now you can take
if it
up
were
from
me,
here.
I would personally ask my agent. And again, if you have an agent that's representing you, a buyer agent, then they're going to have your best interest at heart. They're not going to say, I recommend Joe Griffin from Tri-State, because it is a legal liability for us. But hopefully they're going to say, well, I dealt with John Smith, and I never had any problem, and he's done 15, 20 inspections here at Harmony, and I know him to be accountable, and I know him to be professional. And so, and they might give you 2 or 3. Obviously, real estate companies, we have home inspectors drop by with their brochures monthly, and that's how they procure business. But once I've had a bad experience with any inspector, I take their literature and dump it. Mm-hmm. I trash it, because the problem is I've had that bad experience, but my other agents haven't.
Right.
And so I want to be sure that my agents don't get a bad one either. And so as a small owner, I do that. But when you get to a big company, do they do that? So that I tell you, my advice is find somebody who has had a house inspector that they were happy with, that they felt did an above-average job and were accountable. And like anything else, if you can find somebody that's recommended, always the superior way to choose. And maybe, I mean, you can call 2 or 3, but if they're all unknown, you're relying on who sounds the best.
Right.
And
or you can go to their website, too. I mean, I think that's very helpful, because a lot of good home inspection companies will have a sample report, and I think it's really important to look at the report that is going to be provided to the buyer, because there's a big
How
difference.
inclusive it is.
Right, exactly. How inclusive it is, how many digital photos, and basically how easy it is to understand. A lot of these home inspection reports that you find out there are boilerplate, where the home inspection companies are just trying to cover themselves, and they're more of the meat in the report is what they didn't inspect for versus what they actually found
A
in the
lot
house.
of times I will have clients who will say to me, just have the inspector go without me. And I always say, what a waste of your money.
Right.
Because when you go, there's so much information. I don't think I've ever been with you or any home inspector who didn't share knowledge with me. For instance, they might say, this is how you need to maintain this. This is what you need to do on a continuing basis to make sure that it doesn't depreciate and you have to replace it sooner rather than later. So, and those kind of things, especially, as you say, for the first time, for the inexperienced homeowner, that it's invaluable for a couple of hours. What, a house inspection takes 3 or 4 hours?
In most cases, it'll vary between 2 and 3. 4 hours would be on the high side. If if there's a lot of real estate as far as square footage is concerned. But you know what? It really depends a lot on the buyers, the questions that they may have, whether the house is full of furniture, empty. Things go a lot faster if you don't have to move and climb over things and so forth. So the home inspection will actually move along a little bit faster. So, but basically it's dictated by square footage. And some home inspectors like to talk a lot, and some of them don't. So it depends. So you never know what you're going to get on a home inspection, but you're right, you should be there, and because of the educational experience. And the way my mindset is on a home inspection is I don't look upon it, when I pull up, my goal isn't to basically kill the sale. I'm not there necessarily to find negative things. That's part of my job. But the biggest and my favorite part of my job is the education. I'm there for a few hours with generally you know, a husband and wife, a couple, and we go through the whole house and we explain everything from top to bottom. And they're never going to have that experience ever again unless they go through another home inspection, because you're generally not going to find somebody like a home inspector that knows a little about a lot. Whereas you're going to have...
I'll tell you, I think too, not only should the buyers be there, but I think the buyer's agent should be there, and I'll tell you why. If indeed you come upon a major problem, and it's something that's going to have to be negotiated to be remedial, then that agent needs to know the depth of the problem. And they're not going to get the accurate information from the buyer that they're going to get from you. And so I always try to tag along with mine, just so that if there happens to be remedial things that have to be done, I can be informed and I can communicate that to the seller. So that because part of getting the seller to agree to it is making them understand the seriousness of the problem. And if you don't understand it yourself, how are you going to sell it? How are you going to give that information to the seller? Right. So I really think that the agent should be there as well. And I know it's time consuming, and I know that's why sometimes I think the smaller agency is you know, I don't have to have as many sales because I don't have franchise, and so because
Right.
time is money. I mean, for you, for instance,
Right.
time is money, and certainly we have to balance all of those things. But I do think that taking an extra 2 or 3 hours so that you can represent that client better.
Yeah, in fact, I almost insist on it. If the buyer says, I
Yes.
can't make that particular time slot, we're pretty flexible. Say, look, let's do it tomorrow morning then when you can be there. It is so important for them to be at the
I
home
think so.
inspection. Yeah, like I said, more so from an educational standpoint than anything else. They get so much information, they learn a lot about the house in a very short period of time, and then that's followed up with a very nice home inspection report that they can sit down and go through, and they'll be able to connect those things, because if they're not at the home inspection and they just get the report, it can be overwhelming. It can be very daunting. But if I'm there with them and I explain to them, well, oh, this rot can be easily repaired, and this is what it's going to take, and this is approximately what it's going to cost. And that brings up another thing, is that a home inspection report probably won't contain any costs, but a good home inspector, as they go around, will kind of try to ballpark things so people have an idea before the contractor comes in what things are going to cost.
The thing that comes to my mind is, as you're saying that, if the agent's not there, he can't even tell them where the problem was. He can't, what part of the basement? Basement's a big part of the house. Was it in the middle? Was it the left corner?
Right.
And
right.
I've had that when the buyer agent, if I'm the selling agent, it's not as critical for me to be there, in my view, as it is for that buyer agent. And sometimes the buyer agents don't come. I tell you that honestly. Mm-hmm. They should. In my view, they should, but sometimes they don't. And so I think it's dealing with people you trust, people who take their people who are accountable. I love that word, accountability. So, but Joe, this has been wonderful. I'm sure our audience has learned. I have. Every time I sit with somebody, they refresh all this good stuff in my head, and hopefully I get a little smarter.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you
for having me here.
oh, and the audience. Thank you for joining us here at Real Estate with Harmony. Hope that all your real estate deals have harmony in them. Thank you.